Fraught with violence and chaos, the Unlife of the Sabbat vampire tends to be short, and it often ends in a burst of flame or at the fangs of another Cainite. In between the embrace and final death, however short that may be, much takes place. Street battles, crusades, run-ins with the Camarilla and other creatures of the night, intrigues, political treachery, all these unique events occur during the Unlife of a Cainite. The following aspects of Unlife apply predominantly to young vampire of the Sabbat, who travel in packs, observe Rites with other Sabbat, and involve themselves more into the struggles that sect faces. The Unlives of Sabbat elders by comparison differ a great deal. Elder often keep solitary havens and carry out scheming sequestered unlives and gather with other sect luminaries to plot against their rivals. Elders of the Sabbat ironically resemble the elders of the Camarilla. They tend to distance themselves from the packs, and the sect seems to have little meaning unless it would serve them against a potential enemy. In the end, when all the flames of passion for any cause die out, the only thing that matters is that one has become undead. Vampires of the Sabbat perform the embrace like any other vampires. They select their candidates with all the care or haplessness that befits them. However, to become a vampire is not enough to be considered a member of the true Sabbat. Proving oneself requires participation in a crusade, siege, or other combative trial by fire. Although that is not always the case, as some initiates prove themselves through other means, ultimately the decision to give a child the creation rites belongs to the sire. The rites are always officiated by the pack priest, and the sire determines what sort of special, symbolic form the act should take. They can range from gang-style initiation killings, burying the initiate underground, enduring torture or torturing, and up to reciting a litany of one's lineage or committing espionage. Vampires who do not receive the creation rites are not considered vampires by other Sabbat Cainites, and they may be ordered around, fed on, or even sent into battle with no chance of surviving. To be considered one of the Sabbat Cainites, one must prove himself worthy and thus gain full recognition as a vampire. Vampires at their core are solitary urban predators who stalk the nights alone, as Cain did so many nights ago. However, vampires of the Sabbat do not practice such solitude. Sabbat vampires move in packs, unnatural families of vampires who share a common cause. The packs are formed for a variety of reasons and for a variety of purposes. Naturally, most packs have some martial bent, as Sabbat is a sect of unholy warriors after all. Infinite variations of packs exist, and they range from packs that specialize in guerrilla warfare, scouting, espionage, to packs that focus on interpreting esoteric books and artifacts, and packs that hunt lupins to prove their bravery or stupidity. To the Sabbat vampire, the pack is everything. It is a surrogate family, in that members share ties of mutual blood, embodied by the Volderi. That doesn't mean that this family is not dysfunctional, as packs are mostly comprised of some of the most hellish, savage personalities in the world. The pack also functions as a spiritual guide, as pack priests leads individual members on a journey into what means to be a vampire. The family that prays together stays together, and Sabbat practices an enormous amount of Rites. By confronting or embracing the beast, members have seen each other at their worst, and they depend on others to help them deal with the curse of being a vampire. Packs also serve as protection as well. They watch each other's back at almost all times, as there is no lack of danger. Marauding lupins and other creatures that lurk the night, vicious elders, Camarilla spies, and sometimes even mortals can make short work of an individual, whereas the pack offers its members safety in numbers. All of this does not mean that Sabbat vampires do everything in packs, just most things. They still pursue their individual agendas, deal with people they prefer, and otherwise live private unlives. This is a part of freedom that belongs to the Sabbat. Unlike most vampires who seclude themselves in private and secretive havens where they can be safe from the prying eyes, the members of the Sabbat often share communal havens that support entire packs. In general, each haven has its own pack, which becomes the pack's parish. Sabbat are not picky about their choice of parishes, because most prefer utility over accommodation. Because of their lifestyle, a lot of the time they have temporary havens that are used for a certain purpose, and those can be rundown apartment buildings, construction sites, warehouses, sewers, sepulchres, or anything they deem useful. Of course, because the Sabbat fanatically fears the influence of the ancients and their Camarilla puppets, many permanent havens boast spectacular traps and escape routes. Nomadic packs that travel from city to city without a permanent home often make use of oases or semi-settled caches of equipment and material. Typically, a pack of pilgrims leaves behind tools and money when times are abundant, and hides them in places which are marked with signs so that other Sabbat can recognize it and make use of it. They also use the signs to leave information and updates on where to go, where to get supplies, and what to watch out for. Many would tend to believe that Sabbat is wrong and Camarilla is right, stemming from the principle that aside from Sabbat, other vampires try to hold onto their human ethics. It is an axiom that Sabbat do not attempt to subdue the beast, but rather embrace it and liberate it. Sabbat philosophy holds that any attempt to hide a vampire's monstrous nature is wrong and hypocritical. The Sabbat believes that Cain was cursed with vampirism, and the sect's dogma attempts to teach individual Sabbat that ignoring the fact that vampirism is a curse is a betrayal of vampiric nature. Many scholars and philosophers of the Sabbat studied legends, mythology, and lore of the first acknowledged vampire Cain, and these legends have been used to support the sect's structure and dictate the behavior of its members. Sect's outlook relates to the god's punishment of Cain. Cain killed Abel, and he was punished not directly for the murder, but rather for refusing God's forgiveness. He resented the fact that he had to abide to God's will. So the idea that connects Sabbat with this is that Cain's curse was a punishment for pride, not murder. He chose freedom over servitude to God, and he paid the ultimate price for it. So, is the sect evil? Well, perhaps from the perspective of mortals. But by vampiric standards? In comparison to what? Camarilla has evil aspects and outlooks too. Evil could be defined as putting the good of the few before the good of everyone else, and thus Sabbat not put the good of the many before the good of the few, by acting as soldiers in a war against the eventual dominance of the antediluvians, the one that would rise from torpor and destroy all their children in rain of blood and fire. Camarilla doesn't even acknowledge the fact that antediluvians exist, at least officially. Sabbat would argue that Camarilla even serves antediluvians, willingly or not, and servitude is something that Cain, their father, would never have allowed to happen to himself. So, again, who is evil and who is good? As in most cases, it comes down to perspective. But why are most Sabbat so inhumane? Well, they are not human, and they understand that fact. They embrace it and they foster it. They do not consider that human values apply to them. What causes some Sabbat to choose death over discourse, torture over quick death? First, Sabbat sees itself as a nation of zealots fighting in a war against antediluvians, no less. Wars are violent, and zealots commit all manner of horrible and atrocious acts against their enemies. Moreover, as said before, they accept the fact that they are monsters and don't hold back on it. They have no guilt about doing whatever it takes to win the war and will do whatever it takes to serve their own nature. The politics of the Sabbat is a unique mix of ideological styles. While it values freedom and individuality, the sect recognizes that it needs to put the good of the group before the good of its individuals, at least in theory if not in practice. Sect leaders make a big deal about creating a sense of unity in purpose and loyalty through action for their soldiers. The perspective of us against them is what channels Sabbat's destructive, monstrous nature outward rather than inward. Sabbat is a perfect example of social Darwinism in action. The fittest will survive, and this ethic is applied to everything and everyone. The best suited to continue to exist will continue to exist. The leaders become leaders because of their bravery, combat prowess, strategy, backbiting, bribery, treachery, murder, and almost ironically, honor. That way of functioning tends to, at least in part, keep Sabbat from becoming like Camarilla, whom he believes to be useless and antiquated oligarchy. With its ruling caste in service to the corrupt and rotting antediluvians, they take away the freedom of its individuals and sacrifice their children to gain favor with their masters. Sabbat's hierarchy is mockingly modeled loosely on Catholic Church, with surprising evolution toward mirroring those ranks. At the time of Sabbat's early years of conception, the Church was prominent and powerful, and also xenophobic and ideologically pure. So the Sabbat, out of contempt, derision, and mockery, named its offices after the mortal institution that caused its birth. Through a combination of intimidation, murder, and limited influence, Sabbat extends a brutal hold over its conquered territories. While the sect disdains mortals as little more than food and fodder, they adopt some sort of policy regarding mortal influence and exerts control over those areas that are crucial to the sect's security and prosperity. The Sabbat sees itself as an army at war, and as such its cities are assets, military striking points, and zones of control. While decadent Camarilla may be content with hiding behind their mortal lackeys, Sabbat keeps an eye toward internal security and external expansion. As a result, the sect keeps multiple auxiliary havens and often has an open border policy, allowing vampires to enter the city easily. Suspended in various stages of perpetual anarchy, Sabbat Cities teem with the elements that the sect sees as useful and valuable. While Camarilla avoids open shaping of human society, the Sabbat has no such compunctions. As such, these cities have high-rate incidents of violent crimes, drug trade, population overflow, and corruption. Each city is an exercise in barely controlled chaos. Nominally overseen by an archbishop or council of bishops, they strive against each other for power and prestige with ferocious abandon, held in check only by the bonds of the Voldry. This behavior trickles down the authority structure, and since Voldry is not shared with rival packs, Sabbat vampires are quite likely to engage in internecine warfare. That kind of conduct means that Masquerade breach slip-ups are more likely to happen. However, Sabbat is far less subtle than Camarilla in dealing with mortal hunters and whistlers. This disdain and refusal to recognize mortal as a threat is dangerous oversight that causes multiple problems for the Sabbat. The sect's violent solution strategies may backfire if particularly talented mortal escapes and manages to acquire competent aid or exposure to media. Sabbat elders recognize the unavoidable necessity for mortal industry and politics, so they invest some effort to integrate their influence in some mortal institutions, however mostly illicit ones. Therefore, most Sabbat cities show poor economic state and oppressive conditions, and any attempt to advocate more control over mortal financial and political institutions are shouted out as acting like Camarilla. Acquiring good information is the first step in taking over the city. That is where Sabbat's extensive use of scouts and spies come to use. These spies possess exceptional selection of disciplines, and combined with the loyalty that comes from oWoD makes them very good and flexible espionage agents. Sabbat spies are not embraced as warriors, and they generally operate independently with specific mission objectives. They gather vital information about the city's vampires and locations, strengths and weaknesses. Unless they are detected by paranoid individuals skilled in mind reading, there is almost no way that they could be discovered. Sabbat also uses heavily dominated moles or nearly undetectable revenant ghouls to infiltrate important cities' infrastructure. Once Sabbat spies acquire important information, the crusade begins momentarily. The first casualty is the Masquerade, which forces Camarilla's hand and it keeps the Camarilla busy, while Sabbat indulging in violence can also attack vulnerable areas. Of course, Sabbat is careful not to risk full exposure to the mortal world, which would result in a war with hunters even when Camarilla is removed from the city. Tremere Chantry is almost always the first target, and most casualties are had during this attack. However, Sabbat also simultaneously strikes at the Prince and city's Primogen, which has the goal of undermining the leadership between the elders of the city. While they bicker amongst each other, prioritizing the city's defense, younger vampires are more easily plucked and removed from the equation. Often, Sabbat strikes directly during the Elysium, demoralizing the enemy by attacking their neutral ground with overwhelming force. Since there are heavy losses involved in taking a city, siege is a good time for new talent. Ranging from recruiting anarchs and independents to mass embrace, Sabbat is not picky, since it knows that most of them won't survive. However, those who prove themselves during the siege may earn creation rights and their place among the true Sabbat. After the city has fallen, often there is a problem of partisan resistance. Sabbat's approach to this problem is simple. Typically, they send a couple of fledglings to scout for the enemy, and when the enemy takes the bite on their sacrificial lambs, they easily destroy the resistance. However, crafty vampires avoid striking Sabbat directly, since the sect's major strength lies in combat capabilities and raw numbers. For these situations, Sabbat relies on Assamite anti-tribu and city gangrel, and uses these urban hunters to track the opponents down. As mentioned before, Sabbat makes great use of intelligence operations. With their unique and specialized disciplines, and with oWoD backing up loyalty, infiltration work is almost second nature. It is no surprise that Sabbat has agents in many Camarilla cities. And while undercover work is dangerous and unglamorous, successful agents gain great deal of prestige in the sect for their cunning and daring. With extensive use of the Dominate discipline, it is possible to rebuild someone's memory and personality, even to the point that the person doesn't know her own true loyalties. Sabbat makes use of this tactic to send agents who are truly unaware of their Sabbat ties. These Manchurians are often drawn from among the ranks of young and newly embraced members hoping for quick fame. They are often dominated by older La Sombra in the sect who are meticulous masters of rebuilding someone's personality and memory, even to the point where others would have difficult times penetrating that false implanted persona. Agents are also provided with subconscious commands and triggers that forces them to report back to Sabbat, and then quickly forget the event thereafter. Sometimes captured Camarilla vampires are dominated to the same effect and then released. That way Sabbat doesn't care if their agent is caught and executed, since he is already an enemy. Working with full knowledge of Sabbat connections is far more dangerous, because any paranoid Cainite with sufficient mastery in Auspex or Dominate can uncover hidden loyalties. The most common double agents among the Sabbat are Bruja anti-tribu. Since Bruja already tend to spout revolutionary rhetoric, clan structure makes it easy for the agents to join with any Bruja gang and work for the benefit of the sect while pretending to be rebellious punk. Sometimes Nosferatu anti-tribu are dispatched, but since Nosferatu are tightly knit, it is very difficult to infiltrate without being discovered. Another option is to infiltrate the upper echelons of the Camarilla society, claiming to be a powerful Toreador or La Sombra anti-tribu. This is very risky because elders prefer to find out every skeleton in the potential rival's closet. To counter this, Sabbat sometimes creates a new vampire of lower generation and spends certain time in specialized training and indoctrination to turn the subject into a shadowy pretender. Other times, Sabbat vampire may pose as a member of another clan, learning the disciplines and their ways in order to keep the charade, often claiming to come from a small little known lineage. Obviously, the feat is almost impossible, but some La Sombra may pose as a wayward Ventru, while Tzimisce might pose as a Nosferatu. Of course, they need to be wary of the Tremere's blood magic, which can easily detect such forgeries. Considering the flesh-crafting predilections of the Tzimisce, rebuilding an individual to look like someone else is a simple achievement. Occasionally, Sabbat kidnaps particular vampire and replaces him with flesh-crafted duplicate. This job is exacting and demanding, but it is one of the most effective forms of infiltration. To successfully pull off impersonation, the Sabbat spy must be able to watch the victim carefully for quite some time. He must know the victim's habits, mannerisms, her friends and allies, and even her deepest secrets. Additional difficulty is that the spy also must learn all of the victim's disciplines. Even after all that, he must be very careful about hiding his true intentions and loyalties, so most often the same Manchurian tactic is used on top of everything else. With the recent appearance of the Harbingers of Skulls, Sabbat has added a new tactic that involves the capture of a Camarilla or Anarch vampire and using the power of necromancy. The Harbinger exchanges the soul of the victim with that of a loyal Sabbat. Following with a ritual that masks his aura, the new agent becomes almost undetectable. Prior to this, the agent must do similar work with the replacement. However dark and depraved, Sabbat has its place in this world of darkness. From the outside, Sabbat vampires may seem just as violent, bestial, and mindless brutes, but in truth Sabbat fights the doom of Gehenna that threatens to destroy everything and everyone. Sabbat wages a secret war on the elders, struggling to free themselves from the tyranny of the dreadful antediluvians and the jihad itself. But whether their tactics are effective or simply horrific is another matter entirely.